Please welcome to the stage the City of New Orleans Mayor Mitch Landrieu.
Good morning, everybody. How are you? It's so nice to see you. As they say, joy cometh in the morning, huh, Michael? Ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome the General Manager of the Hyatt Hotel, Mr. Michael Smith, who is our host today. I want to welcome all of the elected officials that are with us this morning. Of course, our police chief. I want to begin by thanking the staff of the City of New Orleans, led by my Deputy Mayor, Judy Reese-Morse, and the entire NOLA for Life team for helping organize this event. If y'all could give her a round of applause. Our coroner, Jeff Rouse, is here. Our police chief, all of our NOPD commanders, thank you guys so much. All of our guests that have come from around the country, I thank you for being here as well to talk about this very important issue in light of recent, very troubling events across the country. And I want to thank you for continuing to walk with us to find a way to make the nation a more safe place for all of us. And this morning I'm going to walk through some thoughts and some ideas to set the tone for the next couple of days of the important work that we have to do. I guess the best way to begin is to say at the very infancy of our nation, a few brave, soon-to-be Americans boldly declared our independence, and these are the words they chose. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among them being life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That is what we as Americans promised to the world, and that is what we as Americans promised to each other. It is the civic covenant that binds us all together. It is our collective DNA. But every now and then, a catastrophic event, sometimes it's a disaster like Katrina with left American citizens stranded at the Superdome. Sometimes it's an event between human beings that morphs and becomes cataclysmic, like the deaths of Michael Brown and Eric Garner, that stop us in our tracks, that won't allow us to look away. And it makes us wonder, are we living up to the covenant made in our founding documents? Then, in a whisper, as if just speaking to ourselves, we're forced to ask, is this really who we are as Americans? I think that this is one of those moments. Morally, economically, and for good of this nation, we must reiterate, we have to recommit, and we have to fulfill the sacred covenant. In order to do this, we have to face, we have to acknowledge, and we have to commit to eliminate the last vestiges of this great nation's original sin. Indeed, in a million ways, since our founding, we've made stunning progress from the depths of the slave ship all the way to the White House. But many recognize that still not enough has changed. I want you to consider this. My father was born in 1930. He knew the sons and daughters of slaves. And I, as a child, saw him tear down the walls of Jim Crow. Now, we're in a new era, but to this day, my children can still sit on their grandfather's knee, look into the same eyes and touch the same hands that saw and touched the children of slaves not so long ago. Yet this is a new era, but for today, many African Americans in this city, in this country, the figurative chains of the past are still there. As William Faulkner noted for us, the past is never dead. In many ways, it's not even past. From day one, for many African American children, the deck is still stacked against them. Think about our struggling neighborhoods, the shootings, the poor schools, inadequate health care, no jobs, failed institutions, broken families. And although we're supposed to be one nation, one city, indivisible with justice for all, the truth is sometimes it still seems like black lives do not matter and that justice does not extend to everyone in this country equally. We may very well be halfway home, but we should be able to acknowledge together that we still have a very long way to go. If you really want to understand how far we have to go and how steep the path is for many, look at the fact that 52% of African American men in this city are not working. And consider that African Americans make up to close to 40% of Americans' prison population, but only 13% of the state's total population. Or you could just go to any elementary school in many of our neighborhoods, ask a classroom of 8-year-olds a couple of questions. Who's lost a friend or a family member to violence? Who's had to run for cover from gunfire? Who's seen a dead body or blood on the streets? Who has heard gunshots ring out in the night? The answers our children will give you will bring you to your knees. It's a story of innocence lost, a child's wondrous dreams dimmed in the face of a harsh, brutal reality that no one should have to confront at such a tender age. Indeed, for New Orleans, like in every city across the country, Chicago, Philadelphia, Detroit, Los Angeles, New York, Atlanta, Cleveland, Ferguson, Missouri, Sanford, Florida, sometimes it feels like we are standing on the edge of a cliff. In the United States, instead of being indivisible, we remain divided. Divided by race, divided by class. We live a block away from one another, but we are often a world apart. There are many examples of this in our beloved city in New Orleans. Treme and the French Quarter, Carrollton and Hollygrove, the Garden District, and just a few blocks away, but a world apart, Central City. I want you to imagine with me 2 children representing the hundreds of kids that live on the opposite sides of that all-important street in New Orleans, St. Charles Avenue. They live just a few blocks away from each other, but they are a world apart, truly, in every sense. In Central City, there's a little boy named James. He's 14 years old. He goes to public school. He stays near 7th Street and Dryades with his mama and his 2 younger brothers. It's a 1-bedroom apartment in a long, thin, run-down building. It's small, but the landlord takes Section 8, and it's close to family. Every morning, James' mama wakes up. She catches the 5:30 bus. She comes downtown to work in a hotel, just like this one, Michael. She won't get back from her second job as a security guard until about 9 or 10 at night. Meanwhile, James gets home from school. Not much going on there in the afternoon. As the sun sets, James gets restless. He walks to hang out with his friends on the corner. He's a good kid. His mama tries her best, but you know what happens. The drugs, the easy money, guns, peer pressure everywhere. The law of the street is strong. And most of the time, there's no one at home to help him stay on a good path. One day, James' mom finds a pistol under his bed. You can imagine this conversation. James is in tears, and this is what he's telling his mama, the same thing I've heard from kids just as young. It's for protection. When I talk to them, they say, "Mayor, out here, it's either kill or be killed." 14 years old. Meanwhile, 4 blocks away, Britannia Street in the Garden District, there's a kid named Mike. He goes to private school. His family lives in a large 4-bedroom house. His mama's a lawyer, his dad's in finance. They both work long, hard hours downtown, but the nanny's home when Mike gets home from school. Or Mike's at school practicing tennis, football, basketball, school, for chess, or quiz bowl. Every night, the family eats dinner together. They relax, they do homework, they talk. With his parents' help and that of a tutor they can afford, Mike is doing well in school and in math. Mike in the Garden District hopes to follow in his daddy's footsteps, not James, because his daddy is in Angola. On Mardi Gras Day, the 2 boys head to St. Charles Avenue, drawn by the backbeat of Rebirth, the bounce of Al Johnson's Carnival Time, and the rally of the Zulu King. One watches the world go by from the lakeside of St. Charles, one watches it from the riverside of that same divide. For a brief moment, they occupy the same world, Their hearts beat to the same rhythm. They move and dance in the crowd with carefree abandon. Who knows? Maybe their hands touch or their heads nod as they reach for the same pair of beads, for a prized coconut, sharing a brief moment, the synthesis of time, geography, culture, race, music, a shared history, both in the same spot at the same moment, touching the same thing that they both want. Really a moment of perfection and peace suspended in time. And then the bubble bursts. It dissipates into thin air, and it's gone forever. Both retreat to their sides of St. Charles to wait in anticipation for the next opportunity that's going to come as the next float arrives. But finally, the sun sets. They go back home, just a few blocks away, but to a different world. In James's world in Central City, the average household income is just under $36,000. In Mike's world, on the other side, a few blocks away, the average household income is over $128,000. In Central City, 69% of all households are run by a single parent. In the Garden District, 3%. To make ends meet, a single parent in Central City earning minimum wage must work day and night, 2 or 3 jobs. So that often means kids are out of school hours before their parents even leave work. This is especially scary for a parent who works late and lives in Central City because since 2010, there have been over 256 shooting victims in that neighborhood alone. Just a few blocks away, in a different world, there's been 1 shooting in the Garden District in the last 4 years. So now that you know all this, I want you to think about Mike and James walking home on Mardi Gras night. For James, like on many nights in Central City, maybe there's a shooting in the neighborhood and NOPD is searching the area. Witnesses say young man in a black hoodie. Looking for the shooter, the cops are on edge, and when they see James with his hood up, they pull up fast and they pull up close. James jerks his hand out of his pocket. He's holding a black cell phone. Unfortunately, we know how this story might end. Sometimes this is how tragedies happen, and for young men like James, the margin of error between life and death is thin indeed. And if we replace James with a young Mike from the Garden District, the difference in that margin of error would perhaps be the thing that allows Mike to live and allows James to die. Here's the truth. Everybody wants to be treated fairly. No one wants their children to be collateral damage, whether the bullet comes from the end of a drug dealer's gun or from a police officer's pistol or from someone shooting at each other in fear. I think of Trayvon Martin quickly walking through the rain with his Skittles and his iced tea. He was killed not because he was doing anything wrong, but because of the fear in George Zimmerman's heart and the fear that eclipsed them both at that moment. Last week, it was Michael Brown's family. First Thanksgiving without him. An empty chair seat at the holiday table, taken too soon. The pain stretches from Michael's family in Ferguson to Eric Garner's family in New York. They too must fill the void that has been left. But the death and destruction does not stop here with Trayvon, with Michael, or with Eric. In New Orleans, in our beloved city, just over the last several months alone, 94 dead, murdered on our streets, nearly all of them young African-American men. 139 dead this year, 785 since I became mayor of this city. Let's take a moment just to remember some of them. Cornell Glover, Aaron White, Tyrone Lacoste, Sky Johnson, Troy Maxwell, Robert Hamilton, Richard Yeager, Jasmine Anderson, Joseph Duplessis, Ariel King, Johan Kenner, Dwayne Joseph, Raquel Gillard, Dion Robert, Casey Craddock, and 15-year-old George Carter III left lying in high weeds in Lower 9. Their untimely deaths make a sort of dark routine, and apart from the heartbroken family and friends whose lives will never be insane, by and large, nobody says anything. There are no marches in the street. There are no boycotts. There is no wall-to-wall press coverage, nothing. Barely a few words for these hundreds of lives. But I don't only think about the victims. I also think about those trying to find the killers of these young men. There are police officers. Being a cop is not easy. To do the job means early mornings, late nights, hours of hard work, stressful work, and moments of extreme danger. And for every cop on the beat, there is a family at home waiting for them. There's a wife, there's a husband, there's a father, there's a son or daughter who sacrifice in their own right. Our police officers are gone a lot and never know if they're coming home that night at the end of their shift. And there is reason for them to be worried. The streets are a dangerous place. In 2011, 8 New Orleans police officers have been shot in the line of duty. Officer Terrence Hilliard, Officer Tony Mayfield, Officer Mike Acevedo, Sergeant Sidney Jackson, Officer John Passero, Officer Troy Pichon, Officer Kevin Ducote, Officer Jonathan Smith. Real names, real people. And I also remember Officer Rodney Thomas. He was my friend, the 110th member of the New Orleans Police Department to be killed in the line of duty, trying to help and trying to protect us. The loss and the pain is searing. I want you to think of Rodney's son and his daughter who have lost a father forever. And in the eyes of Miss Rosalind Thomas, I've seen overwhelming grief of a wife who will never see her beloved husband again. And you know what? It's the same look of grief of a mother who loses her child to murder. And just as a community demands an end to the terrible practice of racial profiling, which targets people based on the color of their skin and not by their actions, the community should likewise not judge police officers by their profession, but by their individual actions as well. We need them. They're people too. They're our brothers and they're our sisters. They're our friends. And sometimes they get shot trying to help us. There is no doubt that we have to reform police practices in this country. There is no argument that Americans have the right to protest forcefully and peacefully. But violent protests that burn buildings and terrorize neighborhoods are an injustice as well, and they're not an acceptable way forward in any way. So, let's take a moment and think. There is a tie that binds together the riots of Ferguson and the culture of violence on our streets. Make no mistake, the nightly unrest in Ferguson and the constant murder in New Orleans are part of the same whole, a poisonous fruit harvested from the same tree. We should remember that because it is the truth. Until all lives matter, there are no truths in this country that we can hold to be self-evident. Until we weep and we march for every life that is lost, and until we speak up for each other's claims to unalienable rights, we will not be able to realize peace in our communities and fulfill those lofty promises that were made in the civic covenant of the opening words. Over the last 5 years, my top priority has been to change the culture of violence on the streets of New Orleans to a culture of peace, because each violent act tears at our city's soul, and each murder leaves a wide wake of destruction and a long, long, long line of victims. A child loses a father. A mother's heart is broken. A family is left alone. And in a downward spiral, violence begets violence. The son of today's victim picks up a gun, and tomorrow there are now two tragedies, a perpetrator and a victim. We are losing a whole generation of promise, and these fresh victims live in a cold, mass grave shared by hundreds of thousands of fellow Americans. I want you to think about this. From 1980 to 2014, over 8,000 people, a disproportionate number, African-American men, have been murdered on the streets of New Orleans. That is more people lost to murder in New Orleans over the last few decades than all of the New Orleanians and Louisianans that were killed in action during World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, the Persian Gulf War, the war in Iraq, and the war in Afghanistan combined. So it's been decades of mass murder in slow motion, on the streets of America and on the streets of New Orleans. And this is what I've learned over the last 5 years. It is not too late. This problem can actually be fixed, and we can change. But the solution must go further and higher. It must be bigger. It must be bolder. And everybody, all of us, have a very important role to play. We must work together to bring justice to the streets. Then and only then are we going to have peace. But in the past, and sometimes in the present, far too often, instead of truly grappling with our problems, we all desperately look for quick fixes. We want to get tough. We want more prisons, more guards. We want more guns. But I ask you, how can we live together if we are afraid of each other? That just makes things worse. That said, let me be clear. The hardened criminals who terrorize our neighborhoods, and there are many, need to go to jail. But we can't just arrest our way out of this entire problem. We've actually tried that. It doesn't work. And many nations with fewer people in prison have less crime, they have less murder, and they have less unrest. Nationally, $70 billion is spent every year on corrections. That's about the same amount of money that we spend on the Department of Education. Indeed, on average, New Orleans public schools spend up to $13,000 per year per pupil. To incarcerate one person for 1 year, here it costs about $30,000. That would get you a first-rate education at a top university. Something is wrong with that picture. It's clear that we need to change our approach. We have to be tough on crime, but you know what? We can be smart on crime at the same time. In New Orleans, to find this better path towards justice, we went to our police officers on the beat. We talked to the murder victims' mothers. We went to expert criminologists and held focus groups with young men in the game, all to ask, how can we solve this problem? What can we do? And you know something? From the hardened detective to the 15-year-old kid in the neighborhood, they all told us essentially the same thing. Solutions have to hit the streets. You have to focus on prevention. You have to focus on justice. So from this wisdom, from what we heard, we designed this cutting-edge comprehensive murder reduction strategy that we call NOLA for Life. It's smart, it's holistic, it hits the streets, it focuses really on what matters most. But during these conversations and others, we heard something else about the issues of violence facing our city. And what we heard was about race. Now, these arguments go round and round and end up right where they started. We've heard some people express their truth about dysfunctional families and what they see as a murder problem almost exclusively afflicting the black communities. Not my problem. We've heard others say that there is no justice system. It's only an injustice system. And the black community, it is the police that are the problem, along with the other failed institutions, and it's just racism. Not my responsibility. Still others say it won't matter unless somebody accepts personal responsibility, and we each need to take care of our own business and help take care of the people around us. And some just point the finger and say, hey, pick yourself up by your own bootstraps. And then, of course, you know the predictable response. How can we pick ourselves up by our own bootstraps if we don't have any boots? There's no opportunity, there are no jobs, even for the many talented individuals willing to work hard. Round and round and round we go. And then we stop. And the conversation ends. All of the above arguments are valid, but we can't stop. Each part contains the truth, but all together they converge to make up a toxic mix that produces misunderstanding, injustice, violence, death, broken communities, and a divided and more weakened nation. Our job is to keep going. Here's the point. It's not either or. It's both and. But we have to keep going. Obviously, the issue of murder goes deep. And although our NOLA for Life strategy is working, murder's at a 30-year low, and we're sustaining those gains, we still have more murder in New Orleans than nearly anywhere else in America. And a big cultural change must occur in our city to truly solve this problem for good. It is a daunting task, no doubt. But we've been here before. Think about it. Right after Katrina, we lost everything. We were on our knees. Necessity became the mother of invention. We got back up. To survive, we had to tackle tough problems. So we started from the ground up, whether it meant rebuilding our homes, our schools, our healthcare system. Now we need to go further to tackle the tough problems of racism, of inequality, the culture of violence. We have to reform our criminal justice system. But first, we have to state and believe that self-evident truth, the obvious, that all men are created equal, and that for justice to exist, it must extend to all. As I have said repeatedly over the years, in both of my inaugural addresses, at the National Urban League, at the Aspen Institute, at the U.S. Conference of Mayors, at the National Press Clubs, and of countless other occasions, I have said Black lives matter. Lives being lost to murder on our streets matter, and there is something that we must and something that we can do about it. In NOLA for Life, we try to focus on prevention. We try to focus on stopping the shooting. We push back on what is an evil notion, that the lives of young African-American men are somehow less valuable than the lives of the rest of us. We have heard it all before. Just thugs killing thugs. There's nothing that you can do about it. But through NOLA for Life, we say that is a lie. Every life is precious. And these young men were not predestined. They were not born to this fate. With the welcome table for racial reconciliation, we bridge the gap to heal wounds so those people can become something more than faceless others. They become friend, and we share with friends, and we help our friends. With our new economic development strategy, we say that no one should be left behind and that everyone who's willing to work hard should be able to find a job, a pathway to their prosperity. Work brings dignity. But the real accomplishment since Katrina goes beyond important plans. It goes beyond important strategies. It goes beyond important initiatives. We, the people of New Orleans, we have changed. We said that we're not going to be quiet. We're not going to stay in denial. We will tackle the problems, put our hands to the plow, sow good seed and good soil to find a way to make a better life for us all, because we have no choice. We have no choice. No one is coming to save us. Some people are cynical. They believe that we cannot complete the hard change that we have begun. Some say that there's nothing that can be done about babies living in poverty and young kids having no real future beyond guns and drugs. Some believe that Black lives really do not matter and that the murder of 1,000 young African-American men on our streets is to be accepted like it is a part of the natural order of things. And some believe that the age-old wounds of yesterday can never heal, that we will always be a nation and a city divided by race, sometimes a block away, always a world apart. I reject those assertions. All lives matter. This problem can be fixed. I am here to tell you that we are each bound together as one people, indivisible, with one shared destiny. By that declaration made so long ago, we go forward together, or we do not go forward at all. We have to keep pressing on, working together, moving forward, one step at a time. And when historians look back at this time many years from now, they will see a people who came together to do what was hard for the sake of doing what was right and change the course of history for generations to come, literally. Our lives, the lives of our children, the future of our beloved country, depend on it. I want you to remember the words spoken so long ago, all men are created equal. But those are just words on a page. The real work, making the jump from aspiration to reality, is why you have all been called here today. It's about taking one step at a time, delivering on the promise as we march together towards that more perfect union. God bless you. Thank you so much.